In this video we're going to see how to rig a quadruped. So I have this quadruped model. Let's look at it more closely. There's a tail, there are 4 limbs, so with human IK you can rig any character as long as they have a pelvis, a spine, a neck, and 2 arms and 2 legs. So even though this is not a biped, we can totally rig it with HIK. So there's a neck here with the skull, and this guy in particular has some kind of complex jaw, which I would rig with some custom controllers, not part of the HIK directly, of course. And let's look closely at the arms. There's actually a pair of clavicles here placed in the middle, so that we can rotate like this and have the upper arm kind of slide along the rib cage. And there's an extra bone here, which I call the scapulae, which is going to slide like this, up and down, just like it would on like a cat or a dog, But this is not a parent of the upper arm. So that's pretty important because you really want the clavicle to be a direct parent of the upper arm. And so this is like an extra one. So if I look at the schematic view, it's separate, it's in derivation. Just like it would with a biped, if this was like a shoulder pad, a piece of armor, for example, it would be separate. It's the same principle here. And so my arms are just upper arm, lower arm, and hand. And the legs are pretty much the same structure. There's a thigh, calf, foot. So the ankle is my foot bone, and then there's the ball joint. So it's the same number of segments as a plantigrade biped, a humanoid biped, for instance. I don't have an extra articulation for the heel. MotionBuilder won't tolerate that actually. So you really need to have these 4 segments, and you can always have toes on top. In this rig it's pretty simple, there are no toe bones, but you could have them and rig them. So let me save this scene as something else, because this is just a skeletal mesh I just reopened. Exported from Maya and reopened directly in MoBu, so quadruped HIK rig, for instance. Save everything. And the first thing I'm going to do is merge the template scene, which we've already covered in the other tutorials for the bipeds. And in this case there are no props, obviously, no weapons, because it's just a creature, so I'm going to select MoBu root control. Select, append all the elements, all the takes. Okay, so now I have my ground plane, I have my root control object, which is a little bit small for this guy, so I'm going to go to properties, transformation pivots, geometry offset, and scale that up maybe 1.5 or even 2, so we can see it a bit better. And in my takes I have the A-pose, the T-pose, and some other takes that I use to organize my file. So I'm going to jump to A-pose and select every bone in the skeleton and key. Here I added a key by pressing S, or here the key in the key control. So I really secure this pose, it's very important. And to avoid selecting the mesh accidentally, I will select all my meshes. So it's a little disorganized now. I will right click auto arrange, select all my meshes, and put them into the meshes group. So down here in the navigator, drag into meshes, add to group. So of course in the meshes group I'm going to unselect pick and transform, so I can no longer pick the meshes. Okay. And I'm actually going to parent those directly to my models. And I will select the skeleton roots. So of course you need to have a root apparent to every other bone in your skeleton. That's mandatory for game animation. You don't want the pelvis to be the first bone in your hierarchy, and parent that to skeleton. Okay, so this is the stuff I imported in the template. So I have the root control, the ground plane, and some cameras that follow the root. So if the root moves, the camera follows. It's pretty useful for gameplay animation as well. So all coming from the template. I'm gonna rename this character node into my quad. It's gonna be the name of my character, just so it's not neutral. And I will populate the export group right away. So I will take every bone I have in the skeleton. If there are bones that you don't want to export in your animations, maybe some twist bones that are directly sold in the engine, you could ignore them. In my case, I will just take everything. So I can drag and drop into the export group here. I can also select the export group in the groups tab, do my selection, and then say update. So now I have all those objects in the export group. If I unselect and reselect it, I select all my export group. So this is what I will export when saving selection. I will select those bones, do save selection, and export my FBX, just like that. My FBX animation. Okay, so let's go to the TPose take now that we've secured our A pose, meaning our bind pose. Of course, for a quadruped, it's not really an A, but so the TPose. So remember, for the humanoid biped, we've done a TPose. So like our character was in A pose by default, and we put it into a TPose with the legs perfectly straight under the pelvis and the arms perfectly parallel to the floor. This is so that every time you rig any character with different A poses that aren't really exactly the same, they all end up in the same pose when you characterize them. So retargeting is more consistent because it retargets from the same orthographical, like geometrical pose. It's easier. For a quadruped, let's say we have like this lizard here. You could have like a wolf, or maybe a horse, with different poses every time. Maybe you have like more like a reptile with the legs on the side. So what to do with those? Like we probably don't want to put them in some kind of weird quadruped TPose like that. It would be a little silly. So what I like doing, if this is like their A pose, I like doing what I call a Q pose, like quadruped. I just gonna put the legs perfectly straight under the belly, really geometrically straight. And this is gonna be my reference for every quadruped that I rig. So let's do that. So just like the biped, I will go into rotation mode, global, and just roughly position the arms and legs. So of course I say arm for the front legs, the front paws. It's easier. And the rear legs. Okay, so roughly, and then I look at the values a little bit more closely here in the view, and I'm going to round those numbers to 90. So here I have minus 90, it's already perfect. I have 0, and I have 92 here, so I'm going to round it to 90. Going down through the chain, I have minus 97, so I'm going to do minus 90. Here I have 29, so the closest is 0, and here I have 89, so the closest is 90. Same with the hand, minus 90, 0, 90. Okay, same on the left. So those numbers depend on the axis order that you rigged in. So in my case, I always have the x-axis pointing down to the children, and I have the y as the up-axis in this case. And we're going to do the same with the legs. Minus 90, 0, 90, and even for every segment, even the foot or ankle. pressing the arrow keys on the keyboard to go down the chain from parent to children and down. Okay, so now that we have this, we really want to select everything, so hold space and right click on the pelvis to select the entire hierarchy and keep. So we capture this pose, this T-pose versus the A-pose, which is the original bind pose. So yeah, maybe we want to raise that pelvis up a little so the toes aren't completely in the floor, but that doesn't really matter. And now that we have this, we can start defining the skeleton. So here in the character controls, define skeleton. Yes, I want to define. And just like the humanoid, you want to double click the empty slots here in white and select the corresponding bone, either in the viewport, 3D viewport, or the schematic view. So I'm gonna go and do that. So spine 1 and the other spine bones. The neck 1, neck 2, the head. Okay, I'm gonna totally ignore all the other bones I have in the face. Clavicle, so clavicle left, and it automatically picked the clavicle right with symmetry. Upper arm, lower arm, and hand. And you can see that here it complains, it puts the upper arm and hands in orange instead of green. That's because we have this straight down pose instead of a lateral T-pose, but that's okay, we'll stay with that. Then my left leg, left calf, left foot, the ankle. And for the ball, like the toe parent, you can come into the sub view of the foot, and it's this one that you want to fill up. And then if you have toes, you can use these mapping here. Okay, so that looks good to go. Ignore the reference node. You can lock the definition here. And of course, the main difference with a biped is that here we want to select quadruped. And go to the toolbox, bake, plot to control rig to create the rig. FKIK, of course. So here we have our control rig, and I can immediately see that something's missing here. So looks like I forgot to map something, and you can see here in my view of the foot, I actually forgot the right ball. So I can go back to definition and unlock, and I can assign it. Now if I lock again, quadruped, big plot to control rig. So it's back, but it doesn't have exactly the same look as the one on the left, and that's because I unlocked the definition, but I didn't delete the control rig. So yeah, it didn't really reset the look of the control rig. So let me do that one more time, unlock the definition, and now I'm actually going to delete the control rig, relock, quadruped, rebake, FKIK, and now it's as expected because it recreated the control rig from scratch. So if you have like as soon as you define the character and you created a control rig, double check that everything is alright, you know, that all the parenting and everything is correct. Otherwise, immediately go back, unlock the definition, delete the control rig, and you know, fix things up basically. Oh, one thing I forgot is in the character settings to deactivate the roll inline on the knees. I want to put that to 0% instead of 60. So now I have my character and my control rig. So I'm just going to rename those because I don't like keeping names neutral. So I will rename the character to myquad, and I will rename the control rig to myquad_CR. And so I have all the FK controls in yellow. I have all the IK controls, the IK effector in red and blue. And there's a namespace for those. So I'm also going to rename the namespace down here. Instead of character underscore CTRL, I will rename them to myquad underscore CTRL. Okay, and I actually want to take the root control and also put it under the reference node because it's part of my controller, so it makes more sense for it to be under the, like, together with all the controls for the rigs, and leave all the models and the roots, the skeleton, as a separate hierarchy. It's just cleaner that way. And when we have the control rig, we of course want to set up the pinning and the IK blends, at least put some default values that the animators will most likely use, but the animators will of course change everything on the fly. So when I move the pelvis here, you can see that the ankles stay locked, which is not super natural. So for a digi-grade leg like this, what you want to do is unpin the ankle, so unpin the foot, and actually pin the ball instead. Pin the pelvis, pin the rotation of maybe the chest, the head, and the shoulders and the thighs with this. So in my case, I press Alt W and Alt E to pin rotation translation, which I just did on the wrists. So now when I move, it's a little bit more natural. And with the legs, you can, animate like this. The feet are pinned, and you can rotate the ankle like that, which gives you a nice behavior. Okay, and I'm gonna just put the IK blend the same as the pinning. And again, we'll let animators take control over this later. So we need to set up the root now because the root bone doesn't follow the control yet. So in the constraints, again, this is all stuff that was imported with the template. I'm just going to populate the driven constraint under the don't touch folder. So a root bone to control. In this case, I want the root bone to be the child, snap and lock, then root control to bone. In this constraint, the root is the parent, snap and lock. So again, as a reminder, we snap because we want to maintain offset, because I have the root with a Z-up flip. So if I select my constraint and just look at the constraint properties, there's a 90 degrees offset between the root and the root bone. And now that I've set up the root bone control, I'll also hide the root bone itself because we don't need to see it. I'm actually going to populate the other constraint as well. So I have my root bake options. In this case, I want the parents to be maybe the hips, and I'm also going to add the chest. Constraint axis, it has X and Z, but not Y. And I'm going to create a hips auxiliary effector, and it's going to be constrained to the hips IK effector. And I'm going to parent those hips to the root control. So this is just for the options that I have in my root control that I can actually control from the master relation that let me, for example, if I activate temp root bake, my root is somewhat under the belly and the pelvis. So it's like a center of mass kind of thing. It's to more quickly bake the root control under the body when I need to. And the hips root space, when I activate that and I turn off the IK blend on the pelvis, my hips actually follow the root, because the hips follow this auxiliary effector, which is in fact parented to the root. So this is when I need to clean up the animation of the hips related to the root during a cycle, for example. Just going to change the look of this to hot cross, so I can actually select the effector and the auxiliary effector both at the same time, like more easily. And I'm just going to make sure I add this pelvis to the character extension of the root. And I'm going to make sure this root character extension that's already here from the template is assigned to my quad character. I'm just going to drag and drop the quad character into the attached character entry here. Yes. And the reference object is also important. I'm going to select my hip pelvis bone. Another thing we need to do is go back to the TPose and go to source none and just back plot. So we get this original pose back onto our controller. So one thing we need to set up too is the foot floor contact. So let's display the floor contacts. Okay, they're super small. So in my character properties, I'll go to modifier, floor contact, feet floor contact setup, increase the size so we see better. So the hands actually have a different separate setting. And the best to set up the foot floor contact is to just activate the option right away. So we will do for hands and feet. I'll jump to another frame and just move down the character. Okay, and you can see that it's messed up, of course. So for the back legs, by default it's feet contact type normal, which is for foot, right? Where you're gonna have the ankle, the ball, and it's gonna apply the foot floor contact like this, right? Like a sole, like a shoe sole. But in our case, the leg is more like this, right? So we actually want to apply the foot contact just over this last segment here. Okay, because this is like the ball. And there's an option for that, which is toe base, I believe. Yes, it's a little far. It's actually quite far now from our foot, so we want to bring that back in. I'm actually going to go back to the TPose to see a little bit better. Now when I try to put my foot down, it looks a lot better, a lot more natural. Maybe on this side it's a little too wide. And in this case I don't have any toes, so the automatic toe base won't do anything, of course. Now let's look at the hands. So the hands also have hands contact type, which I'm going to put to, maybe let me try wrist. Wrist seems to do the trick, I think. Yeah, so approximatively, that's pretty much it. Remember we talked about the scapulae, which is the bone I have up here. So I'm just going to rig that. My goal is to have it slide along the rib cage when I rotate the clavicle like this. So I'm going to unpin the wrist translation so I can rotate the clavicle and see what happens. So when I rotate up too much, the scapula starts going into that kind of spine that I have up there. And to avoid that, we can use some IK to keep it pointing up. I'm just gonna duplicate the bone itself. So both bones, left and right. Copy paste those and reparent them respectively. So I have a left one and a right one, and maybe rename that to end, something like that. And I'm going to change the color to red, so I remember that those are just bones that I don't need to export, and they're just here for the rigging aspect. I'm going to make them a little smaller, and I'm just going to move them up along the x-axis. So of course my scapula was already pointing kind of in the axis that I want it to move. So let's see, I have a minus 90, for example. I'm going to put the same value on the other one. So plus 90, it's up there. Okay, now I can actually duplicate these two bones, because for an IK what you need is obviously a parent, a child, and a target, and that target is parented to something else than this structure here. So that's what we're trying to do here. So the only thing I'm missing now is the IK target, and for that by default should be on the same spot as the end that I put here. So I'm just going to duplicate those, and I will directly parent them to the spine 3, which is the last bone of my spine. So it's the chest basically, which I have here. I'm going to put those in blue just for the fun and call them maybe IK. And just for safety, I will select those IK targets and scapulae and bones, and deactivate transformation and selection. So the user can't actually move them around. And on the scapulae target, I will deselect the parent link, so we don't see it anymore, and it's a little easier to see what's going on. Change the size. Okay, so we have our bone set up, and now we just need to create the IK constraint. So constraints, right click, insert constraint, chain IK. So I'm going to have a scapulae IK left, duplicate that, and IK right. In the scapulae left, this is my parent, so my first joint. The scapulae, then, so that's this one. Then the child is going to be the end joint down here, and the target, left IK, is going to be the effector. So similarly, on the right, I'm going to take the scapulae right as first joint, the end as the end joint, and the IK as the target effector. And I can snap both. IK constraints are always locked. Okay, and now when I take the clavicle, of my HIK rig and rotate it, the scapula keeps facing up like this. And maybe in this case it's actually a little like tight. I might actually want those IK targets to be up a little bit more. So I'm gonna go back, I'm gonna deselect. So I'm gonna go back and deactivate my two IKs, take those IK targets, re-enable transformation, and move them up a bit more. So on Y I have 322, so I'll put the same value here, 322, and then on X I have 30, 31, so I'm going to put minus 30, 31. There we go, it's symmetrical. Key those two and re-deselect disable transformation. Now I can take my two constraints and snap them again. Okay, so I think this looks pretty nice. I can animate the character, I can, rotate the head. And that's pretty much it.